Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Well, welcome. I hope everyone's having a super fun time. Everyone's getting some good food, meeting some cool people. I hope you heard an amazing talk by Cameron earlier today. We're super excited for the second talk. I want to introduce, the next person doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce anyway. His name is Ben, but you might know him as the Seattle data guy. He's going to share some knowledge, some wisdom with you on how to do data engineering, how to be an amazing freelancer, consultant, be your own boss at it. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ben.
Yep, thanks Tommy for that great intro. Hey everyone, it's great to meet you all. It's good to be here virtually. Tommy said, my name is Ben Rogojan. Before, just to give a quick background for those who don't know me, I've been data engineering pretty much for the last, I think, 8 or 9 years. Originally working in healthcare and then some startups, and eventually worked at Facebook up until 2021. All throughout that time, I'd also been consulting. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is kind of like some little tidbits of that journey, as well as kind of maybe hopefully some of the reasons I like consulting and I like doing the work. And then maybe if you have some questions, letting you guys ask some questions about that. But yeah, like just starting in terms of starting as a consultant, it honestly started by accident. I happened to be working at a hospital at the time, and finance director, it was like a temporary finance director, came in and kind of we talked for a little bit. And as soon as he figured out I was technical, as what usually happens, they ask you to do everything. But they also were like, hey, I see that you can do technical work. Occasionally I do consulting, would you like to kind of jump in and help me out? And I was like, sure, yeah. I think I was like 23 at the time. I was like, sure, whatever. And didn't hear from them. They kind of left the company because they were just a temporary finance director. And 6 months later, they reached out and they're like, hey, I have a project. I'd love for you to help. So that was my very first consulting project, which was migrating someone from Access to SQL Server. So that kind of feels like such a long time ago and feels like such old tools these days. But that was honestly my very first consulting project. And that kind of got me excited. Like, it was a lot of fun. I think there was a lot of learning that I did. Obviously, there was the whole side extra income that I made that really made me be like, okay, well, what's here? Can I dig more into consulting? And again, I'd been doing a lot of data engineering, programming work. And I was like, well, I think it was 2014, 2015. And I'm like, well, data science is kind of this thing and it's cool. So I want to try data science consulting. And so I spent, I think, a year just putting out content, trying to get people to talk to me to do data science consulting. I actually did get a few projects. I taught a course on ARIMA modeling at Microsoft and a few other small projects. But there really didn't seem to be a lot we really didn't seem to be catching a lot in terms of possible clients. But every client that I was doing always ended up requiring some data engineering work, right? Even when it was data science related, there was always some need for data engineering work. So I was like, well, I do data engineering, so maybe I'll just switch and start focusing on data engineering. Maybe there's something more there. Maybe there's more I can learn. So that's where when I ended up trying to switch kind of what I was doing, I'd been doing data engineering anyways. So I just started kind of switching what I was talking about and talking more specifically about data engineering. And then honestly, I found that there's a ton of what felt like endless work in the data engineering consulting space. And I really, again, just had a lot of fun doing that work. And I think this is kind of why I've continued to do data engineering consulting. Again, I've worked for Facebook and there's a lot of, it was fun in its own way, but I think there's something about one, getting the opportunity to be your own boss, getting the opportunity to kind of take a little more control that makes it a little more exciting to me. I think the other thing that I really like is that I kind of distinguish, consulting and contracting. I think because many people probably listening to this are technical, we always mostly end up doing contracting work, which is hey, we just need an extra pair of hands to do some work that we already know what we need to do. And now someone just needs to do it, right? There's no real consulting in that realm or that world, right? Because they already know what they need to do. They just need someone to do the work, and they just don't either have the budget or the time or something about it that they don't have the employees. So there's kind of a distinction where contractors just tend to be an extra pair of hands, and consultants tend to give a little bit more. You give your opinion, you share. There's a little more weight into what you do. And so when I first started consulting, I definitely did a lot more contracting work where I was just helping people kind of like fill in the gap. Okay, I'll be that technical hand because you don't want to hire anyone. But as I've kind of shifted, I've really enjoyed kind of shifting more. Obviously, I can never avoid doing technical work, but like shifting more into that like strategic leadership position as well. Whereas like in a lot of companies, maybe they don't have someone that's like a data leader. Maybe they have an IT leader, maybe they have a CTO, but generally the data space and data engineering still tends to be relatively new. And so there's still a lot of people who are just trying to keep up with everything. And so I think that's been a really fun part to me about data engineering, and a really good opportunity because there's so much of a gap between even like technical people and data people. Like there's a lot that you can teach even people on the tech side. And I think that's what I've really kind of like catch or leaned into, is like not just doing the work, but helping educate, helping leading, and helping actually drive decisions. And not just being the person that's like, okay, I'm the technical person, I'll fix your problem. Again, I think it's somewhat unavoidable just because, we do technical work. We all will always have to, someone has to do the actual work at the end of the day. But I think those are the things that I really end up enjoying about consulting. Is it's not just about the technical work. It is also about the strategic level of work where you're driving value beyond just what you can code and just what you can, write in SQL. So I think that's something that's really been something that I'm gonna keep going for. I think, with all of that said, a lot of people often ask, okay, how do you start in consulting, and how do you kind of, grow it from there? Like I said at the beginning, when I first started, it was honestly an accident. Someone just happened to basically hand me a client, essentially. And in my young and like naive age, I was like, okay, so this is always going to be the way it is, right? Like, okay, I'm making basically the same amount of money I'm making my job consulting, and that'll never change. And in about 8 months, obviously that project kind of came to a close, and then I had no other clients. So I had to spend the next year basically figuring out, okay, how do I get more clients? How do I actually, actually grow a business, and how not just rely on someone else to send me clients? And, for me, my method has been a lot of marketing. That's why a lot of people know me. That's why a lot of people reach out to me, whether it's my, YouTube, whether it's my Substack, whether it's me on LinkedIn. Those have all driven, work my direction. But everyone, I think, has different things that they're good at. And there's a lot of different ways that you can find clients. This includes things like obviously doing more sales activities. So if you know people, maybe networking with them and having them intro you to people that maybe need help. That's always a good option as well. I mean, I've seen a lot of people even turn, Upwork into a reliable consulting business. So there's definitely different ways you can find people. For me, again, I'm not like the greatest salesperson in the world. So marketing just helps kind of reduce that barrier for me. So I think for some people, that's a great way to go because, if people already trust you, if they already see you as an expert in the space, there's a lot less of a barrier when you're conversing with them and asking them to trust you on a project, because they already kind of trust you to deliver content. Then it kind of becomes easier. But some of you in the audience right now might be great at selling to people or telling that story that goes beyond just like marketing. And tomorrow, maybe you could find some clients. So I think these are kind of the key lessons I've picked up, throughout my experience. There's a lot of mistakes I've probably made throughout my tenure as a consultant, and I'm still learning as I'm now like only focused on consulting. It's been a little over a year and a half now, and it's been really exciting. Again, plenty of mistakes, but I think plenty of things that have gone well. And honestly, it was definitely like worth, I think, leaving Facebook in the end. So yeah, that's kind of the end of my talk. I just want to give you guys an intro on, consulting, freelancing, how it's been for me, some of the lessons that I've learned throughout that. And then honestly, I wanted just to open it up to you guys and see, like, did you have any questions that I could answer to help, whether you want to do freelancing or just general data engineering questions, always happy to answer questions.
Hey, thanks, Ben. So I'll ask the audience, as I said, right, you can ask anything. not necessarily to be freelancing as a data engineer, but any open question for the data engineering itself is we need to ask and answer that question. So when we have a question like how data engineering is different in different organizations, like in startup, in established product-based firm, consulting, service-based firms. So what's your experience on that part? How it looks different in different organizations?
Sure. I mean, in some startups, they don't really have a data engineering organization. I've often noticed that there's kind of like some phases that a lot of startups go through. Like the first phase, like, when it's like 5 people, and you're likely just having someone doing some Excel to do your analytics. Once you start growing and have more data, and have like an actual application that you want to track and analyze that data, that's when you might have like software engineers kind of creating some makeshift pipelines. And at that point, it's kind of fine. Like they might be piping it over. They might be making like just a replica database, that someone then is just analyzing data. Maybe they're just sticking Excel over that even. And then eventually, after maybe that phase, you'll start seeing them be like, okay, software engineers no longer want to do the data pipeline work or the replica work because it takes, a lot of time. It takes their focus away from building new features. And analysts are having a hard time working with these normalized tables. So they eventually are like, okay, let's get some data engineers in here to like actually do the work. So that's often what I see with startups, is that you see this kind of phased approach as they're trying to figure out what's the bare minimum. Obviously, they don't want to have a huge team of data people that they can have, so they're not, blowing their budget. Eventually, you might start developing a more established data team, and then you'll often have, maybe 1 or 2 data engineers that build your core data, and then maybe a few analysts that then analyze that data. Once you start going towards larger organizations, then you just have often that like almost siloed approach where it's like every team can sometimes just end up having their own data engineering team. That was the case at Facebook, where it's just like, okay, we have, you've got whatever Instagram and they've got their own data engineering teams. You've got, maybe Facebook Messenger, they do their own data engineering teams, and that's different than the main Facebook app, and all the other apps that exist. So then you have possibly, just individual data engineering teams that have individual goals. I think that's what led a lot to the whole like data mesh concept, is a lot of the bigger companies, because they have so many things and so many data engineers, it was almost impossible to have like a enterprise level data like strategy. So you just kind of have everyone do their own. But that if you go to like older companies and enterprise, you'll often find, I think, a little more of a service-based approach, where it's like a core data engineering team that maybe gets pushed out to do work for different organizations. So it's like data engineering as a core, and then maybe you do work as needed. So those are usually the models I've seen. At startups, it's kind of just one core team, but it's kind of built up over time. Often at big tech companies, you'll see, a lot of like siloed teams that are kind of just doing their own thing. And then often, I think at enterprises, you'll see a mix. Sometimes it'll be siloed teams, but sometimes you'll have this more enterprise approach where there's like a central team and they kind of go out and do their own, or do things as they're needed across the organization.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for answering that. Any other questions?
So, what is your take on backfilling process? So, currently in the backfilling must be this for finding data, but later on when you have 10 bytes of data, how do you keep backfilling and making data?
Okay, so Ben, the next question is, what's your take on the data backfilling when it comes to the large volume of data? Let's say 1 terabyte of data we have to backfill. So how are we gonna take care of the consistency part and smooth processing? So what's your experience on that?
Oh, I thought it was just my opinion, because I was going to say I hate it. I just always have like flashbacks with Facebook, because whenever I would run jobs to backfill it, I'd run it back for like whatever 3 years, and there'd always be data that was missing somewhere in all of our processes. So that would always be the annoying thing. It was like at Facebook, you're kind of spoiled. Like when you talk about like, oh, 1 terabyte, that's not the problem. The problem is there's just so much stuff going on. Like whatever you're trying to backfill, whatever table might have 30 other jobs that it depended on, that if you try to backfill it for say a few years, what ends up happening, right? Like it's somewhere someone's either deleted that data or something, so your whole process will freak out on a few random dates. So that was always the weird problem there. Yeah, I guess I don't know, that probably doesn't answer the specific question, but I'd have to get I'd have to understand that question a little more. Like, what specifically are you asking?
So maybe this question is around maintaining the consistency part. Consistency, let's say 1 terabyte of data. So how we can make sure it's not breaking, and when we backfilled it, it's up to the mark, like our expectation. Or maybe you can add your experience doing it effectively. Maybe that would be also one point to discuss when we are doing the data backfilling. So what should be the points we need to take care?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm for me, usually it's I'm trying to think specifically with backfilling. I think I'm gonna guess your concern is mostly making sure that as you like backfill that data, that it still represents the exact same data it did prior. Usually whenever I've backfilled, I usually make sure, like at least the systems I've built will have the raw sources somewhere. So even if you're backfilling, you're still relying on the same sources of data to build the prior data sets, and then maybe you're maybe adding a new column or something that's the reason you're backfilling, is you're adding some new column or new information. So that's always been the way I've done it. So I think I haven't run into consistency issues in that way. Usually I'll also have built test cases or some sort of comparison, like maybe I've got a comparison database to make sure that as I'm backfilling, that the new tables all make sense, minus the whatever the new column that I'm adding or whatever the change is. I've literally just maybe even kept a table, so I can just say like, okay, I've added a new column, I need to backfill just because this new column or whatever the reason might be. But is all the prior data still the exact same as the current data? So you might do some sort of matching there, which for that, there's a few different methods. You can just do the simple, like, does every row equal the same as every other row, which is simple, but it's always worked. So I don't know if that's exactly what he's asking, but I have to understand specifically more about that problem.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. You have
basically think about the approach or challenges to follow for any data project or for estimate and cost of work.
Okay. So Ben, the next question we have, what should be the approach, right? Let's say someone is starting with a data engineering project, right, from the very scratch. So what should be our approach, like step by step, including it could be requirement or cost estimation, figuring out about the infrastructure. So how it actually goes from end to end.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to start a little bit with requirements, understanding, and those requirements shouldn't just be like, what tables are you building, but what are those tables being used for? That is definitely part of it. Understanding the size of data that you're going to be working with is always important. I've definitely had a lot of projects in my, I've had a lot of different projects where I've had to set things up from scratch, and I've had to do the same thing on multiple projects, but it's required completely different solutions, because for one project, we're talking about, oh, they have 100 gigabytes. Not a problem. For another project, it's like, okay, well, we have 100 terabytes, and, we have to move it from the US to EU and all the problems that deal with that. So even though if you're pulling the exact same data from one database to another, it's the same way, understanding like where data lives, and then understanding how large it is, and how much of that data you need to pull in is always important, because that just ends up playing a major role in terms of like your time estimation. Because it's hard to kind of like, it's really easy to solve the 100 gig problem. It's really hard to sometimes do the 100 terabyte problem or 10 terabyte problem if it's bigger and larger in scale, depending on where things live, especially in networking. So I think those are always important in terms of like understanding kind of just what the environment looks like, and then what the end goal is. Because that will tell you a lot, again, in terms of like timing, requirements. Again, understanding what people are actually going to use the data for is very important, because that tells you, okay, what kind of data models do we really need to build off this data? What data do we not need to pull in, right? Like they're going to always want to pull in everything. You don't need to pull in everything. So it's like figuring out exactly what you should pull in. I think that's kind of the first part. After that, yeah, I definitely do some cost estimation, especially when I talk about consulting. And I have clients that, for some clients, $1,000 a month is a lot for them. And, figuring out, okay, well, what can we do with $1,000 a month? What solutions work in that space? And for other ones, it's like, $100,000 a month is, that's nothing to them. They're like, oh, that's what we spend. That's normal. So figuring out what fits in those different kinds of realities for different companies is also really important. Figuring out what solutions you can use. If you're going to use a paid solution, if you're going to use something you're going to code yourself, I think that's always kind of that next step. Like after you've kind of understood the requirements, you kind of maybe test it out a little bit. Then you kind of bring a POC and then maybe some cost estimates to your client. And you're like, okay, this is kind of what we've done. This is generally what it's going to cost you. And then from there you can start fleshing out a full project because you've kind of given them an example. You've shown that, hey, I can deliver. I think that's something that's always important with most projects, is delivering as early as you can to build something that's like decently reliable, but they can see something, especially for business folks. If you're delivering to technical folks, it's different, but business people, I think I've always found that they like seeing results and they like feeling and touching things as fast as possible. And they start to lose confidence. If you're just like, oh, I'm still building, and, I'm still setting up Kafka and I'm still setting up this and I'm still setting up that. And it's like, okay, cool. It's, 2 months in and we still haven't actually seen anything. So I do think there's some balance in there as well. It's like, okay, we've delivered your initial dashboard. You've kind of seen it. It's not what you should rely on. Let's keep, building the rest of the infrastructure. So that's kind of generally the process I follow, some requirements, some sort of MVP plus cost estimation, and then a fully fleshed out plan that we can kind of go forward with. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay. So data engineer science this. So let's say a data engineer starts to learn when building machine learning. So how they will data engineer
The question is, the data engineer should get involved in data science and ML related things or not? So when the question we have is specific to data engineers, whether they should get involved in the data science and ML related things, or it should be completely separated, like data science should own their task and data engineers should do their job.
I think there's always some value in understanding what your counterpart is doing on data science or ML, right? If you're just kind of throwing them the data over the fence and then hoping it's what they need, I think you're kind of doing a disservice to them and to yourself. Like, it's like, yeah, like you should at least understand what it's doing. I also think it's important because, this could just come from like working in FANGs, where it's like you have to prove your worth constantly, because it's like, oh, you're competing with 1,000 other people that do your job, all who probably do it better than you. So you're just like constantly like, okay, what did I actually do the last 3 months? Like what did my like tables actually drive in terms of value? And so like for me, I was always constantly trying to understand, okay, what's this doing? What's it for? Who's going to see this? Like it's okay, a data scientist wants to do an analysis, but who's going to see it? Like what's it actually driving? Are you just curious about some random question, or is it actually going to connect to something that I can then show and be like, hey, look, this is what our work is doing. So I do think there's always value in understanding like what the other side is doing. And I also think it's important because what sometimes I think ends up happening is like data science or ML doesn't realize that data engineering has built something that they could use, and then they'll just go build something themselves. Like ML will just build their own data pipelines. And if you would have had a conversation and been a little more in tune with them, maybe you would have avoided that work. So I think that's something that's also kind of valuable in the space, where it's like you both learn from them, you understand more what you're doing. I think there's a lot of value in understanding that the other side.
All right, thanks. So we have a time for just 2 questions because it's super late for the pick one from here.
So my question is basically I'm from all the data quality background. My question is more into that from the area and I will be about across very data states when the data is distributed to the data warehouse or the data house and the other other fixed it and then is there any project after for data is before it has to be it's people need to be that so that's a very big deal for taking data quality.
All right. So when we have a question from data quality engineer, so I like her point is like they are able to identify the bugs in the data at the very later stage once the data is transformed and particularly landed in the warehouse, lakehouse, right? So as per your experience, how it can be identified before the terminal stage, right? Is there any approach or a point which you want to highlight so that it can be, let's say, identified in between project or the pipeline?
Sure. I mean, usually when I, and you know, maybe they already do this. Usually when I set up data quality checks, I'll do it throughout my process where it's like, you know, when I pull the data in from raw, like from some sort of raw source, I'll do a general light check. You know, you just need to check that all the data makes sense. It's nothing crazy. And then as you process it, and then maybe, you know, if you've got a staging layer, you know, you do that initial cleanup, and that you started to do some level of like deduplication and some transforms. Then I'll generally have some secondary layer of checks that, again, kind of try to duplicate that logic, maybe in a different way. Like, hey, we're expecting there to not to be duplicate IDs or specific things like that. And that's kind of that layer of checks in that staging where you're doing all your core transform and just trying to create your core kind of clean data sets. And then as it moves to like prod and like maybe more of your like aggregation and analytics layers, that's where I think I generally try to create more of like test cases where it's like specifically built for each table. You know, maybe if you know you're building an aggregation table for specific metrics, you try to build some test cases for those key metrics. Like they shouldn't go out of a certain bounds, or they shouldn't be negative, or they shouldn't be this, or they, you know, something that tries to check if things are reasonable. If you can, like sometimes like one of the problems that you'll also often deal with is data, like maybe your data's right, but a different data source says it's wrong. Sometimes I'll build some tests to compare against other data sources as well, just to do another comparison. If I can, that's usually a challenge, but that's like, if I still have time, that's like my final thing is like, okay, let's see if we can build some checks to compare against other data sources where we're going to be reporting off of. But yeah, that's usually my general approach is like you have multiple layers of checks at each stage, kind of getting more and more finite and specific towards what the data is actually doing as you go throughout that process.
Thanks, Ben.
My question is, what are the using for someone who wants to start this journey that training for the job data engineer and also market myself and what should be the asking like the market there are experience and data engineer so I start and how to make out the market and the process for the
Okay, so when the question, this is much more oriented to the freelance data engineering. So let's say someone who is a completely noob and let's say just want to start in this freelance data engineering. So what should be the primary tech stack they should first explore? And second thing, how they can market themselves, means standing out among the good freelance data engineers so that they can reach out more and more clients. And third, how to do the cost estimation for the clients. Let's say there is a project, so what should be the code to complete that project?
Sure. I think for tech stack, there's like a few different options there. What I'd say is like find a tool that people find like challenging. When I say that, I honestly started to find a lot of work because I started writing about Airflow, and I started writing about the fact that Airflow is hard. And so I found a lot of consulting work because like there's a lot of people out there who are using Airflow, and it's like, oh, Airflow is hard. So because of that, and because a lot of people use Airflow, that combination did well. Before this, there was like Looker. I mean, Looker's still around, but like Looker's another example where it's like Looker's arguably a difficult solution for a lot of non-technical people to use. So if you focus on consulting there, that could give you an opportunity. I think currently the big space I'd say is like Databricks is kind of like that. Like Snowflake, like there's consulting to do there. But if people want Databricks, like Snowflake is personally far easier than like Databricks. A lot of people just get like hung up on like, well, what like, you know, what setup, what CPU do I even pick? Like, do I pick this one? Do I pick that one? Right? Like Snowflake's made it so easy. And then you go to Databricks and it's like, I don't even know which compute setup to use. And it seems like a small problem, but for a lot of people, you know, and for a lot of clients, like solving those little things, that's what usually just stops them from even using these tools. So finding a solution that a lot of people are using, again, like Databricks, like Airflow, and help in like writing content about that stuff, I think is one way to stand out. LinkedIn's not a bad place if you can find your voice, if you can find, you know, a way to catch people's attention. And I think there's a lot of people doing it, right? Like Darshil's doing it, Shank's doing it. Like there's plenty of people who've found ways to kind of stand out. Upwork's kind of an interesting space because it's somewhat of a race to the bottom. It's hard to compete when everyone's competing for price. But if you are good, like as someone who's used Upwork for other things, like I use it for editing and a few other things, I'll generally be willing to pay for good talent as long as they're rated well. At least that's how I mentally think. So it's like that is one other opportunity. It doesn't let you build a brand, so that's like the downside, but it does bring you clients. So that's kind of pros and cons. So in terms of marketing, I find like everyone kind of, I think, has something that they do well. I don't know how to say the guy's name who does all the MLOps diagrams, but he's really good diagrams on like MLOps stuff, and he stands out because of that. You know, Chad Sanderson stood out because he's written about data contracts mostly and data quality, and like he's made a huge following because of that. So you can find a topic, I think, that enough people will want to hear about and write about that is totally unique to honestly everyone else's. Like I think Zach's big thing is like he's super authentic. Like yes, he talks about data engineering, but like there's just a lot of like he's willing to talk about things that some of us aren't. So that's what I think his advantage is, and everyone has their advantage in their marketing style. So if you're going to market, just figure out what it is, what topics you're going to cover. Maybe you're really good at doing diagrams, do those. Again, Darshil, just to bring him up again, does really good data engineering project videos, and that makes him stand out. So just figuring out which thing it is and really just doubling down on that.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. I know it's super late for you, but your experience. I hope our audience enjoy the experience Ben shared with us. I won't take much of your time now because it's super late. So from our side, thank you so much, Ben, for
Thank you all.
joining and sharing the experience with us.
Thank you. Thank you.